Okay, thanks for bearing with me on that. I'm basically just adjusting the little text window here just so it's a little bit easier to read, but no one's here, so it's fine. I'm gonna continue my little project here. I don't want to waste too much of your time, so I'm just gonna listen to some SCP stories by the Exploring series, zone out, and just continue making these Megaman levels in 3D. That music you just heard is the remix I was working on. What was it from? Megaman 10, Pump Man. What a great tune. But you don't have to hear it again because it's been playing for like 3 times now. Okay, that's gonna be it from me. If someone shows up in chat, I'll chit chat, I'll talk, say what's up. But otherwise, I'm just gonna zone out, shut up, and get to work. I've already kind of late on this, so yeah, I don't know what else to say. Otherwise, just sit back, relax, and enjoy, I guess. All right, here we go.
3667. All's well that ends hell. Well, it's my usual nature to give some sort of lengthy preamble to introduce the article to you, perhaps with some slight philosophical musings. I think for this one, the title is enough to get you interested, as the Foundation finds a portal to hell and does what they do best. Let's begin. SCP-3667 is an extra-dimensional anomaly located in a sinkhole at the bottom of a diamond mine in the Republic of Saka in Russia. Radar and other imaging techniques don't show anything unusual below the mine, but the sinkhole contains a Leibniz-class spatial anomaly, meaning that it's created and sustained by a shared belief. The anomaly is 5 kilometers wide at its widest point and 6 kilometers at its highest point, consisting of a subterranean network of caves and passages. This network contains a variety of stone structures and complexes, usually crudely built, and a variety of mostly wooden machinery designed to imprison and/or torture humans or humanoid figures. Also present are around 12,000 anomalous human beings, most of which are suffering from varying degrees of psychological stress, and 24 unique species of sapient and largely anomalous entities, all of which display hostility to humans, especially those of Russian descent. The sinkhole leading into 3667 was formed in 2010 during a routine drilling operation at the mine. The resulting cave-in killed at least one worker and injured several others. Some of the workers proceeded to explore the cave system, identifying some of the stone structures and possible human remains, but while attempting to contact their superiors, one of the hostile entities emerged from the sinkhole and immolated them. The winged creature then proceeded to attack the nearby town of Murny, resulting in dozens of police calls which were picked up on by the Foundation. Fires spread across the town, and a number of buildings collapsed, slowing down the Foundation, and ground troops proved to be ineffective in subduing the entity. 17 MTF members were killed, either by immolation from the entity itself or from falling debris, before a Foundation helicopter managed to take it down. Afterwards, the entire town was amnesticized, with the extensive fire damage attributed to a gas leak at the nearby Polytechnic Institute. Surviving mine workers and executives at the company were led to believe that the mine had ceased production in 2004 and was off limits to the public. A surface-to-air missile system perimeter was established in anticipation for more entities emerging from underground, and the anomaly was classified as Keter class. So far, 4 more entities have emerged from the sinkhole, all of which were swiftly terminated. We're given some brief descriptions of some of the different species of entities located in the anomaly, starting with the species that initially attacked the town. This entity has the head of a dog, with large bat-like wings, standing around 3 meters tall, or close to 10 feet. It's covered in short, coarse fur, and continually exudes a flammable substance which it can ignite and use offensively. Captured entities of this species display rudimentary cognitive ability, forming complex social structures, and are able to recognize recurring patterns in abstract shapes. Another species is much shorter and described as toad-like, with no respiratory or digestive systems, instead possessing a large, spike-filled cavity which it apparently uses to transport captive humans between torture devices. A third species is an emaciated humanoid around 1.5 meters tall, with red-brown skin and an oversized head. These display human-level intelligence and speak modern Russian, offering subjects wealth and power in exchange for cherished personal objects. The entity doesn't possess any anomalous abilities, however, and once a bargain is struck, they will attempt to renegotiate for something readily available. Another species consists of 48 humanoids standing around 5 meters, or over 16 feet tall, with curved spines. They are covered in furs and wear oversized skulls of a variety of tundra animals, speaking Old Church Slavonic with a familiarity with modern Russian. They refer to themselves collectively as magistrates. Of course, we know what's next, as the Foundation sent in a brave MTF team to scout out the anomaly. The foreman team enters the sinkhole, causing all radio contact to cut out for 3 seconds. When it's re-established, the team is standing on the floor of a large cave, dimly lit from an unidentified source, with sounds of running water heard. Due to the frequency in which anomalies have possessed or replaced Foundation personnel during periods of interference like that, they each carry a device to measure any changes in baseline reality. They spend 2 minutes checking themselves, and everything is clear. So they look to see that the dimensional anomaly on this side looks to be an uneven hole in the air. They begin to move forward, stepping on what they initially thought were uneven rocks, but later proved to be bones, probably skull fragments. They continue moving towards the sound of running water, remarking on the terrible smell in the area. They eventually come across a wide stream, yellow-gray in appearance, and along with the sound of running liquid are a number of voices whispering in Russian, too layered and indistinct to make out individual phrases. The river apparently smells like rotten eggs mixed with blood, mixed with vanilla, for whatever reason. One of the team throws a small stone into the river, which doesn't seem to have any effect, so they take a sample of the liquid before crossing it. They note some unusual clumping patterns in the water and find some very uniform stones on the other side, broken off from a part of a nearby wall. They guess that the wall is 100 or few hundred years old, as some of the bricks are disintegrating, and they ask Command if there's any primers on the chance that they encounter sentient life down here. Command tells them they're not cleared for that, and for now they should just scout out the rest of the structure and then pull out. They enter into a ruin, passing through a hallway into a large circular room, with a rock at the top where a hole to let light in should be. On the floor of the room is an elaborate but badly damaged mosaic depicting a variety of anomalous creatures, including some resembling the winged one that attacked the town. The entities are reclining over a system of red and yellow rivers alongside some small humanoid figures. They then see 4 more hallways branching further into the structure, so they split up, each taking one of the hallways, which, to be honest, seems more like the actions of a bad Dungeons & Dragons party than a proper MTF. Command tries to argue against the plan, but the team lead, Anna, insists and tells Command to watch each of them like hawks. One of the team, Gregory, says that he feels like he's approaching an exit as he feels a breeze, and indistinct noises can be heard in the background. He then suddenly switches his headlight off and begins whispering, saying that something is here. Command tells him to get back to the entrance, as they're pulling all of them out, but Anna tells him to stay where he is so she can come get him. Anna walks into the room with her headlight on, seeing Gregory crouched behind some rock. The two other members' headlights are also visible in some other hallways, showing that they all converge into this room. Gregory tells them to turn off their lights, as it knows that they're here. An entity then appears out of the far end of the cave, approximately 10 meters in height, with a feline appearance, and calls them sinners and foolish creatures, saying that they should have stayed in their cages. Anna tells Gregory to get out of there, but he says that he fell down a hill and he can't get back up. The entity says that they do not have the mark of Ognayana, and asks how they found their way to this place, since they should not be here. Command tells Anna to leave Gregory there and get the others out, as the entity advances towards Gregory. The entity says that he does not have the mark, so when he dies, he will not come back, and this is good. Gregory manages to pull a frag grenade out of his pack and throws it at the entity, who merely picks it up and swallows it. It tells Gregory that shiny baubles will not buy his life, assuming that it was some sort of treasure, but then the grenade detonates, swiftly killing the creature. Anna grabs Gregory and helps to carry him out, telling Command that he's got a twisted ankle, and the feline entity is no longer a threat, now missing most of its head. The whole MTF manages to make it out, and portions of the feline entity are taken back for further study. The sample taken from the river shows that it features anomalous molecular structure and bonding sites, but it will actively bond to organic molecules to create a cubic lattice. Encouraged by the overall success of the first exploratory mission, the Foundation set up a base camp within the mine and sent in 2 more MTF teams to further map out the area and find out the source of the spatial anomaly. The teams are in good spirits going in, with one member remarking on them finding a whole lot of kitten kibble in there. Command says that they'll likely be in there for quite a while, so they hope that they brought their sleeping bags. They're authorized to terminate anything they find in there, and the Foundation isn't overly concerned about the level of danger from the entities here. The teams begin heading in a different direction than the first team, also remarking on the vanilla smell in the area. They're interrupted by a noise resembling a human scream, emanating from deeper within the cave. They stay silent for a minute, but the noise doesn't repeat. They decide to try and track down whatever made that scream, and Command just tells them to stay sharp and go slow. They hear the scream again, from a greater distance away, noting that it could be a civilian that got dragged down here. They continue sweeping forward as the ceiling starts to drop, closing them in, and they come up to the edge of a large, shallow body of the same liquid from the river. Command says that they're still running tests, but it won't harm them to touch it. They pass through the liquid and come out the other side, where the ceiling rises again. Multiple noises can be heard here, including a repetitive scratching sound. Command doesn't want them getting lost, but they continue to poke around, finding a pile of something on the floor that looks like wood chips. One of them starts opening fire on something, afterwards remarking that it was likely a rat. The rat was inside of a large, intricate, circular wooden structure with one side winched open, where rows of wooden spikes covered in a dark substance, presumed to be blood, are visible. The rat looked like it was adjusting parts before it ran away. They hear more noises resembling human whimpering coming from deeper within the cave, and one of the team leads advises a strategic retreat. They see more of the wooden structures of varying shapes and sizes across the cavern, all covered in large rats that are staring at the exploration team. They shoo the rats away, and then see several forms within the wooden structures, noting that there are bodies in some of them, probably civilians from town. They then see that one of them is still alive. and the exploration log ends. After some time, they ended up pulling out over 12,000 humanoid anomalies from the cave system and relocated them to a nearby site. Most of them were taken out of various torture devices, but some were being transported within the large toad-like entities. Some were found trying to flee the area, and some were being consumed by other entities. They all display anomalous, limited regeneration capabilities, in part due to the presence of the odd liquid from the cave system in their bloodstream. The Foundation has, of course, tried to put that liquid into others to try and replicate the regenerative abilities, but with no success, suggesting that it's just a catalyst for the humanoid's abilities. They are still killable, though, if you simply apply enough repetitive force to exceed their regeneration. Most of the humanoids are perfect physical and genetic matches for former residents of Murney within the last 50 years, while the others do not correspond with any known person, living or dead. All of them claim to have lived their whole lives within the anomaly, but the Foundation has found cadavers within the town that match some of the humanoids. Not everyone that lives in the town ends up with a copy in the anomaly, though, as analysis of town records and the copies indicate that several criteria must be met. The resident's family must have lived within the town limits for at least 2 generations, and the resident must have been suspected of committing a crime, but must not have been convicted of said crime, such as arson, pedophilia, lechery, avarice, homosexuality, or paganism. Finally, with some exceptions, the resident must have been affiliated with or maintained close ties to the Light of Five Heavens Russian Orthodox Church and its founder, Sergei Guslikov, a radical branch of the Orthodox Church that was excommunicated after Sergei's death. Over the following 2 years, 41 separate explorations were commenced into the anomaly, resulting in most of the interior being mapped out, and instances of every known species of entity being captured. On August 23, 2014, a 50-meter tall, or over 160 feet, pig-like entity emerged from the sinkhole and attacked the nearby camp, leading to 3 casualties and 20 severe injuries. The entity possessed regenerative abilities and what appeared to be an exoskeleton, so initial termination attempts were unsuccessful. The members of the camp retreated to the nearby SCP facility to wait for reinforcement, and upon return, found that the entity had destroyed most of the missile systems around the perimeter before moving to the area directly in front of the sinkhole. There, it was completely unresponsive to the Foundation's presence, allowing them to easily dispatch it with a round of drone strikes. The director of the nearby site and the Saga Republic Regional Administrator argued to the O5 Council afterwards that the entities within the anomaly represented a continued danger to both Foundation personnel and the people of the town of Murney. Therefore, they should make a coordinated effort to wipe out every hostile entity within the anomaly, and attempt to secure the cooperation of any sentient instances where possible. This led to 8 separate ethics committee hearings, as genocide isn't usually on the Foundation's itinerary, but the O5 Council finally approved the plan. A total of 6 MTF teams were sent into the pit of hell with violent intent. They are supplied with some armored fighting vehicles equipped with anti-demonic kinetic and incendiary weapons, and a translator to allow for communication between the Russian MTF and the English-speaking MTF, the Mole Rats. This is the Mole Rats' first time inside of the anomaly, but they're well trained and familiar with dimensional anomalies, so they're not overly concerned. The plan is for each team to follow one of the major rivers, where they are likely to find the larger entities, and to clear it out from end to end. Unfortunately, this plan wasn't discussed with the Russian MTF, with the mole rats explaining that this is the best strategy if you want to keep it clean and quick. The Russians argue that they all grew up around this mine. They were here when things started coming out of it, and they've been down here more than 40 times, so they can handle themselves. The mole rats argue that this is what they get called in for, so they'll just have to trust them. They initially find only some rats, which they suspect are just normal rats, until they finally find an entity that looks like a skinny child with a big drooping head drinking out of the stream. They proceed to terminate it with extreme prejudice, and a mole rat asks if that one was sapient. Someone else answers that it was, but just barely, and they wouldn't lose any sleep over it. Another member says that they've been down here where they couldn't walk around without sneezing all over a colony of entities, but now the place seems empty. The team lead of the mole rats asks how many of the big rivers they've explored down here, with the answer being around 80%. There's 3 of them that they haven't, which are currently being traversed by 3 of the MTF teams. One of the teams had just reached the end, where it drains into a sinkhole that seems to have a shallow bottom. Another team scouted ahead to find that the river ends by going into a very small crack. The third team, however, found that the river flowed into a large cave, with bricks in the walls, bones and garbage present on the ground, and a couple torture devices with no people in them. They can also hear noises come from further ahead, so all of the teams decide to converge on the cave. One of the team members at the cave remarks that the river looks different there, as it's bubbling, appears milkier white than before, and gives off a small amount of heat. When the others arrive, they try sticking a telescoping pole into the river, and when they pull it back out, the end is missing entirely. As one of the leaders is saying to stay away from the river, a large leech-like creature drops from the ceiling of the cave and engulfs the upper torso of the mole rat's leader, who was standing closest to the river. Before anyone else can do anything, the leech flops into the river, dragging him with it. The leech appears to be immune to the river's effects, but his body and skeleton quickly melts into a thick white paste as they flow down the stream. The leech entity shakes itself free of the remaining skeleton and swims further down the river. The rest of the team proceed further into the cave, following one member that ran after the leech in anger. The surrounding environment begins to brighten as they move through, until they stop on a rocky outcropping. Approximately a kilometer ahead of them is a large complex of stone structures, several stories tall, containing enormous lit metal braziers. The complex straddles the river, and the teams watch as a complicated wooden device releases several humanoid entities into the river, where they quickly dissolve. An elaborate system of wooden walkways crisscrosses the river, where a number of entities are perched. Massive millipede-like creatures are seen periodically climbing between the river and walkways. The entities are all reaching into the river and extracting some liquid, which slowly solidifies into a humanoid entity, which is then eaten, while others are excreting fully formed humanoids into the river, where they quickly dissolve. One of the MTF leaders decides that they're going to finish this here and now, regardless of how many entities there are, so they begin pouring out the liquid anti-demonic material into the river. An after-action report estimated that the introduction of this anti-demonic solution into the river system led to the termination of over 80% of the anomaly's native inhabitants, except for the humanoid entities. The leader that initiated the plan was subjected to internal review due to unorthodox actions taken in the field, but was ultimately commended instead. 3 days later, 24 instances of a previously unidentified species of entity emerged from the sinkhole. While the MTFs present would have normally bombarded them back to hell, they decided not to immediately open fire due to one of the entities waving a stick with a large white cloth tied to it. A small contingent of MTF operatives, accompanied by the translator, went down to meet them. As they approach, one of the entities speaks in Old Church Slavonic, an old dialect that the translator can manage to understand. The entity asked if the translator is the one they bow to, if she is their queen or just the messenger. The translator says that she is a representative of the Foundation, the people who've been exploring the caves, and she wants to ask them some questions. The entity says that the translator is a herald, but one who does not shake in fear, so they will treat with her.
What's up, man? Yeah, I'm just
Another
listening to
entity
the
asks her where she would like to
SCP
set their
stories.
treaty: on wood, on stone, in the trees, or in music on the air. She asks what kind of treaty they're talking about, to which another entity responds that they would like to make an offering in order to be at peace. The translator asks what they're offering, to which they say, "From the caverns of the Domovoi to the lands of laughter and sorrow, and all the sweet rivers that flow between, and all the creatures that live in those lands, those who have been marked by Ognaena and their shepherds, and they will provide their counsel and advice to the Foundation, who would be masters of this realm, to keep it safe and prosperous. They swear this on the bones of Kirnu Bo, and they will set it in writing wherever she wishes. They don't want anything in exchange, this is just their offering, as the Foundation came here to conquer, and they slew many of their warriors with weapons they do not understand. Now they come to offer up their land and their lives." The translator tells them that she needs to talk to her superiors. A couple of months later, the Foundation reached an agreement with the entities, giving control of the anomaly to the Foundation in exchange for limited autonomy within the anomaly and freedom from arbitrary termination. A new site was constructed within the anomaly to directly study the anomaly and the entities, and a research complex is currently under development, named after the fallen Mole Rats member. Upon the recommendation of the entities, and confirmed by the Foundation's own studies, several steps have been taken by the Foundation to ensure the continued stability of the anomaly. The ruler of the anomaly must have an honorific that accurately represents both the anomaly itself as well as the belief system of the individuals that created it. Therefore, after careful consideration, the director of the site within the anomaly has been given the official honorific of Director of Hell, which will be used in all official documentation. Additionally, entities within the anomaly have been granted permission to perform a variety of other rituals in order to ensure its continued stability. After some years go by, the research department head of the humanoid entities at the site, with the honorific of Eater of Fire, declares that the only anomalous ability possessed by the humanoid entities is their regenerative ability. Given the enormous material cost required to maintain them, he declares that the Foundation is disbanding his department and relocating all of the humanoid entities to classified locations to allow them to reintegrate into society. In another email, however, from the director of the site in the anomaly to a couple other site directors, she says that last month they discussed the dwindling supply of D-Class, and she said that she had none to spare. She's happy now to announce that something has come up to change that, and she'll be sending out a shipment of new D-Class next week. It isn't as many as they hoped for, but these ones will withstand most anything they throw at them. She hopes that they're able to put them to good use, and signs off the email with her official title, Director of Hell. All in all, this whole situation could have been far worse for either side. The Foundation managed to lose only a handful of people, and they decided not to completely wipe out every last entity within the anomaly. Sure, they decided to continue the practice of torturing these poor human copies in the name of research, but as they say, never let some regenerating humans pulled out of a portal to hell go to waste. SCP 3001 Red Reality. The Factory. Anomalies in the SCP universe come from a wide variety of origins. Some come from other galaxies or other dimensions, some appear through accidents, often related to other SCPs, and many are created or manufactured by various anomalous entities or groups. We've already looked at a couple groups known for creating anomalies, Dr. Wondertainment and Are We Cool Yet? And while both of them have put out things that are inherently dangerous, they are generally seen as lighter-hearted groups. Another group known for creating things, though, is the Factory, but their anomalies tend to be far darker in nature, and often much more dangerous. I've looked at a few things that the Factory has been responsible for, such as the fake Heart of the Broken God in the Ouroboros cycle, but there's plenty more. Like many groups of interest in the SCP universe, the Factory is mysterious. Its organization, goals, and methods of operation are pretty much a complete mystery, and the only thing really known for certain is that they possess the capability to churn out all sorts of anomalies. The few bits of information we have on the group itself come from a few different sources, including the Global Occult Coalition, Nobody, the Serpent's Hand, and Marshall Carter and Dark. The problem is that each source tends to partially contradict another one, lending more mysteriousness to the group. The GOC state that the Factory is primarily stationed in the Midwestern US and several countries with poor labor laws, reportedly founded in 1835. They have no other information about who is part of the Factory, their organizational structure, or their goals, but they appear to be self-funded through the sale of mass-produced anomalies. The Serpent's Hand provides more info, but how trustworthy the information is up in the air. They claim that the Factory, or the Robber Barons as they refer to them as, are a trans-universal concept that moves between realities, albeit with great difficulty. In each reality, they appear as a twisted and corrupt amalgamation of recent successful businesses and organizations, and recruit workers from the local populace. From the way the Serpent's Hand describes them, the Factory is akin to a reality-hopping infection that corrupts and drains each world they stop off on through the creation of anomalies. Either way, the Serpent's Hand don't seem like big fans. Marshall Carter and Dark don't mind them though, considering them to be one of their suppliers. They list various locations where the Factory has a presence, including England, Japan, the US, and China. They note that the Factory manufactures items through the use of an alchemical molecular printer, which is fueled primarily through the dismembered limbs of workers, who then replace their limbs with prosthetics. MC&D plans on buying up stock of something the Factory creates called glittering salmon, which they will then modify and sell back to the Factory employees in order to reduce pain caused by injuries. In the Factory SCP-001 proposal, we looked at a potential origin for the group, specifically as a massive, tainted factory built in 1835, which aligns with what the GOC mentioned. That proposal describes a scenario in which the Foundation essentially got its start from the remnants of that factory, but it's rather limited in view when considering the overall scope of the group. So all we really know is that there's an individual or group of individuals somewhere out there that continue to pump out abnormal products for an unknown purpose. That's pretty flimsy, I'll admit, but the real interesting bits are in the SCPs themselves. So let's take a look at a few. Let's start by looking at a couple of the products that the Factory has mass-produced and put out into the world, only to be contained by the Foundation. SCP-248 is a small booklet filled with stickers, each reading 110%, with the words "The Factory" in small print in the corner. The booklet was discovered at a small house in Georgia after one of the stickers was placed on an old, half-disassembled tractor by the youngest son. The tractor was suddenly able to run as if it were fully functional, despite lacking much of the frame and engine. Testing with the tractor revealed that it operates as if it were in pristine condition and is capable of achieving speeds slightly faster than would be expected, but still requires gasoline in order to function. A sticker was then placed onto a computer, resulting in its storage space increasing by 10%, its RAM reaching 110% efficiency, the heatsink pulling off 10% more heat, and electricity flowed through the system 10% more smoothly than the best modern superconductors. A test was done with a D-class to see if the effects worked on organic material, but it failed to produce any observable results. The sticker was removed from the D-class after a great deal of effort, removing the D-class's skin with it, despite chemical analysis of the adhesive to be consistent with everyday Scotch tape. Attempts to remove the sticker from the tractor completely failed, so a second sticker was added instead. The tractor did end up reaching speeds equal to 220% of its default, but after 15 minutes it began to show advanced signs of rusting. After 36 minutes, it had almost completely turned to rust, at which point both stickers fell off and were no longer anomalous. Overall, that one's really just incredibly useful, with very little downsides, although it does beg the question of whether or not things will rust and fall apart with only one sticker before too long. SCP-585 are a group of 4 two-hole pencil sharpeners made of brightly colored plastic, with "The Factory" printed on their undersides. The pencil sharpeners operate as normal on a pencil up to a certain point. If a pencil continues to be sharpened using 585, its sharpness will continue to increase without any apparent limit. The effect can be reverted by inserting the pencil into the other hole and rotating it counterclockwise, although the lost mass from pencil shavings will not be restored. A typical pencil will reach its normal maximum sharpness after 20 rotations, with tests showing a pencil after 30 rotations can be dropped from 1 meter and embed itself 10 centimeters into a solid steel bar. After 40 rotations, the pencil was dropped from 1 meter into bedrock, penetrating down half a meter. After 50 rotations, it penetrated 5 meters, and after 60 rotations, it penetrated down 50 meters. You know, the Foundation has to keep going until something explodes, so they continued sharpening it until 100 rotations were done. At this point, the tip of the pencil began radiating extreme heat, resulting in the wooden part of the pencil bursting into flames. The pencil was then inserted into the other hole in the sharpener, causing the sharpener to melt, leaving only 3 of them left. It's noted that the sharpeners were originally recovered from an elementary school after an expunged event. Alright, that's a little bit more of what we expect from the factory, as there's really not much benefit from that, since the sharpeners only work on pencils. What exactly the factory's goal was in releasing those things into the wild, let alone an elementary school, remains a mystery. I mentioned Dr. Wondertainment earlier, and SCP-2933 brings a potentially interesting connection between the two groups. 2933-1 is a partially submerged steel structure within a large saltwater reservoir. Both the exterior and interior of the structure are extremely rusted, with several features having disintegrated completely. It's currently believed that this structure was designed to contain 2933-A. The interior of the structure is essentially a shifting labyrinth, with passages having been observed changing, moving, or disappearing completely. Currently, it's believed that all of the passages within the structure lead to 2933-A, and once inside, there is no way to return to the entrance. Additionally, any individual or machine that enters the structure will slowly begin to show signs of rusting on their exterior surface, with the affliction believed to be permanent. This corrosion will spread across the entirety of their exterior before affecting their internals. The speed of this process increases as the subject approaches 2933-A. As is typical in these situations, A D-Class is chucked in to see what the place is all about. As soon as he enters, he remarks that there's something bad in there, a sense of foreboding that's built into the walls of the structure. He also hears something faint that sounds like metal grinding on metal. After some time, Command tells him to return to the entrance, but he says that he's already been trying, and he doesn't think there's a way out. He also tells them that his skin is starting to flake off, like it's rusted. As he descends the structure to gather more data, the temperature continues to rise, as well as the level of gaseous pollutants in the air. The grinding sound continues to grow louder, and the skin affliction he's experiencing is burning him, spreading up towards his face. He eventually comes across a person in the bowels of the structure, 2933-A. The voice picked up by Command is noticeably distorted and metallic sounding, but the individual greets the D-Class in a friendly tone, although it suddenly screams in the middle of its sentence. It introduces itself as Mr. Smiles, which it says is tattooed on its leg, although when the D-Class looks at it, it actually says Mr. Scary, property of the factory. When the entity scratches the rust away, though, it says Mr. Smiles, from Little Misters by Dr. Wondertainment. The D-Class asks him what he's doing here, to which the entity replies that his father built this place for him and told him that it would keep him safe, or it would keep people safe from him. He doesn't remember. He screams again during the explanation, and a deep metallic groaning sound is heard in the structure. He says that everything hurts, but it's okay, as his father told him that he will come back for him once he was finished. He further explains that his father was very sick, as the rust was inside of him, so he promised Mr. Smiles that if he took the rust from him, he would be able to make smiles for everyone. After he gave the rust to Mr. Smiles, though, he was afraid, as Mr. Smiles says that there's just something about the rust that terrifies his father, and he didn't even want to look at him. Mr. Smiles continues to groan in agony throughout the conversation as metallic sounds are heard within the structure. Mr. Smiles is certain that his father is out there, making smiles for people, and he'll come back for him someday soon. The D-Class asks him about the rusting of his skin, but Mr. Smiles says that there's nothing you can do about it, and the pain only gets worse. Once you have the rust inside of you, it just spreads and spreads, until there's nothing left but oil, smoke, and rust. It seems that Dr. Wondertainment possessed this rust infection that is related to the factory, and managed to pass it on to one of his little Mr. creations, Mr. Smiles. Mr. Smiles was then placed into this special structure to prevent him from leaving, and now he lives in perpetual agony with the hope that someday Dr. Wondertainment will return and remove the rust from him. What exactly the rust is unknown, although it's somewhat of a common theme with factory products, as we saw with the tractor with the double stickers on it. This isn't the only article to potentially link Wondertainment and the factory, as a couple tales include the idea that Wondertainment was a former employee of the factory that managed to escape. Moving on, SCP-4511 is a large mechanical construct made of iron, resembling a domestic pig. It's located in the basement of a disused meatpacking factory in Chicago, and measures 15 meters by 25 meters by 20 meters at its widest points. Its primary entrance point is a large blast furnace, which is in a constant state of activation despite being disconnected from all fuel lines and ignition sources. It also possesses a thin slit on its left flank that, upon certain conditions being met, will produce an index card containing a series of instructions. The structure is overall heavily rusted. The Foundation first discovered the factory and the construct after investigating some reports of occult activity in the area. In the basement of the factory, they encountered heavy resistance from a group of occult worshippers, resulting in the Chicago PD and embedded Foundation agents taking out 46 of the cultists, with one survivor being heavily injured. An index card was discovered within the construct, reading, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied. Every 12 hours after containment, 4511 produced an identical copy of the card, until the surviving cultist passed away from his injuries. At this point, a new index card was produced reading, "Current demand, the metal teeth that endlessly turn. Period, 1 week." It's unclear what happened after 1 week, but what followed was a series of other demands that the Foundation decided to acquiesce to. The next demand was the metal of this suffocating prison, to which the Foundation threw 57 pieces of scrap iron from around the factory into its blast furnace. The sounds of metal crunching persisted for 2 minutes, and 3 hours later, all of the gears in the factory rapidly rusted, although 4511 was unaffected. The next demand was for oil to slicken my frozen joints, to which the Foundation threw 3 200-liter drums of machine oil into its blast furnace. Low-pitched gurgling was heard for 38 minutes before the remains of the oil drums were expelled, and the construct shook violently for 4 minutes. Afterwards, a large amount of rusted scrap iron and 2 domesticated pig femurs were also expelled. The third demand was for 2 of my children, made in my image, made in flesh. So the Foundation gathered 2 adult domestic pigs, 1 male and 1 female, and forced them into the blast furnace. The 2 pigs passed through the first layer of fire without harm, and were obscured from view. 5 seconds later, high-pitched squeals were heard for 25 seconds, and for 47 minutes afterwards, a low-pitched gurgling sound was heard. The next demand was for the hooks used to hang my children's corpses, so 17 meat hooks from around the factory were thrown in, resulting in metal crunching sounds being heard for 11 minutes before a spherical metal object was forcefully expelled, killing an agent. The agent's body was then also thrown into the blast furnace. The fifth demand was for a canine. First, I consume his best friend, then him. A German Shepherd was tranquilized and forced in, after which yelping was heard for 27 minutes before the dog was expelled back out. 55 minutes later, 7 teeth were expelled out at high speeds, 6 of which were dog teeth and 1 was a human canine tooth. The sixth demand was for a worker for the line, to which the Foundation decided to toss in a D-class that had died earlier due to natural causes. The construct emitted loud crunching noises before abruptly ejecting the corpse, which was now extremely disfigured due to heat damage and repeated blunt force trauma, as well as lacking several internal organs. The seventh demand was again for a worker for the line, to which the Foundation forced a living D-class in. Screaming was then heard for 2 hours. 34 minutes later, a liquid mixture of human blood, pig urine, machine oil, and rust began leaking from the construct for 46 minutes, with the human portion of the liquid being a genetic match for the lead researcher. The eighth demand was for a youth to grow in the factories. The subject and the results are redacted, but it's noted that the subject was forced into the construct using an electric shock prod. The ninth demand was for fuel for my internally burning fire, so 450 kilograms of refined coal from the factory were shoveled in. The flames in the blast furnace grew by 60% immediately, resulting in the death of one of the researchers and another being injured. The factory began to shake violently for 3 hours and 22 minutes, and 55 minutes after the shaking began, groaning was heard beneath the construct. The 10th and final demand was for the false foreman, delivered to my maw to prove your faith. The lead researcher, who initially objected to the testing, was shot in the leg with a pistol before being thrown in. Screaming is heard for 4 minutes and 17 seconds before ceasing. The regional director that authorized the tests received word of the results of the 10th demand, and decides to send in an MTF to check things out. The contents of the fuse box for the elevator leading to the basement are revealed to be sealed to the door with what seems to be a layer of fat. They eventually get the elevator moving, but it stops along the way down as the lights turn off. They force the elevator doors open, revealing all of the lights in the basement to be off. As they walk across the catwalks, they step into a puddle of urine and look up to find a fleshy growth attached to the ceiling that is leaking the liquid. They walk down to the basement floor, but realize that one of their members is not responding, so they retreat back up to the catwalks and find her unconscious with a large wound in her right thigh. She regains consciousness but doesn't know what happened to her. Since she can't walk, they decide to leave her on the catwalks as they continue traversing the basement. They find SCP-4511, next to which is a large pile of white-coated bodies that appear to have had the blood drained from them, with a figure sitting on the floor next to the pile. The figure is wearing a researcher uniform and stands up, showing a large burn scar across his cheek, and is holding something in his hand. The MTF tells him to drop it, but he replies that whatever they can do to him is nothing compared to what it can do. He says that he took their oil to feed it, and he'll take theirs as well. He says that they can't win, because if they kill him, it wins, and they'll never let it win. The MTF responds by shooting him in the head, resulting in a rumbling sound emanating from the construct. The member that shot the man walks forward and takes the thing he was holding, an index card and a small clump of bloody flesh. The card reads, "Meat from those who seek to do in my faithful." The agent picks up the piece of flesh and throws it into the blast furnace, causing the flames to expand. The team leader chastises the agent, who doesn't know why they just did that, but the team retreats back up to the catwalks. The agent who was injured is now unmoving, with her gun next to her. They grab her and retreat out of the factory. The regional director decides to take over as lead researcher on the project for the time being, remarking that this anomaly is more dangerous than they originally gave it credit for. 2 hours after the MTF left, the construct produced another index card before ceasing all activity, reading, "Current demand, a flock of my own. Satisfied." It's clear now that whatever is responsible for 4511 is capable of compelling individuals around it to carry out its bidding. The Foundation essentially played right into its hands. To be honest, this one didn't really have anything to do with the factory organization, but rather it's just related to creepy factories. And I didn't know where else I'd cover it, so there you go. Let's finish by taking a look at a creepy factory that is related to the organization, SCP-748. 748 is an abandoned industrial complex located in Massachusetts, capable of mass production through anomalous means. It was originally constructed beneath a normal, non-anomalous factory, but it appears to be incomplete based on hallways ending in dead ends, walled doorways, and wires and pipes that connect to nothing. The machines contained within the complex are all rusted, damaged, and mostly disabled, but documents indicate that when active, they would have required a level of power on par with a fusion reactor, although the Foundation has yet to locate their power source. Posters throughout the factory display various motivational slogans, such as, "A hard worker is a happy worker," and "Active minds lead to idle hands." The first subterranean floor of 748 consists of 8 hallways that converge into a circular room equipped with a large mechanical lift. The hallways are cell blocks designed to house the factory's workers, with the capability of housing somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 individuals, albeit in crowded and unsanitary conditions. The second floor is a rectangular chamber apparently designed for the packaging and shipping of products, despite its distance from the surface. There are 3 identical machines present, labeled after 3 Greek wind deities, and it's believed that their purpose was related to the transportation of objects. There is also a 4th machine against another wall, but it has been destroyed. Scattered throughout the area were heavily rusted crates containing anomalous products. These products include 500 highly radioactive rocking horses that are biologically alive and scream when observed, 500 fur coats crafted from pelts of various unknown creatures that are perpetually on fire, 2,000 rifles that superficially resemble the M1903 Springfield but possess a high Hume level, meaning a high level of unreality, 800 bowler hats that cannot be removed once worn and cause the wearer to expel wasps from every orifice, 200,000 cigarettes that transform the consumer into a shark once consumed and result in the individual exploding after complete transformation, and 10 metric tons of highly radioactive rotten meat from a hybrid species of human, pig, and squid. The third floor is a semicircular chamber consisting of conveyor belts, pneumatic tubes, electron tubes, and pipes that lead into a large machine, seemingly capable of anomalously constructing practically anything. It seems that this machine suffered significant damage at some point in the past, likely in the early 1950s. The factory was originally built in 1882 by Randolph T. Metzger as a textile mill, with the factory underneath secretly built between 1896 and 1908. The surface factory was shut down and abandoned in 1915, becoming a popular spot for urban explorers, although a number of disappearances eventually led the Foundation to discover and contain 748 in 1992. We're given a brief biography on Metzger, who was known for possessing a rags-to-riches story, and employed 70% of the population of the city where his Massachusetts factory was located. Unfortunately, he was also known for the absolutely dismal working conditions in his factories, eventually leading to a bombing at the Massachusetts factory in 1895. This led Metzger to start the construction of 748, and based on his private journal, he had aligned himself with an entity known as the Investor, an unidentified figure capable of supplying anomalous technology. Metzger would eventually commit suicide in 1915 by a gunshot to the head, although none of his brain matter was found, and his family and household servants were never seen again. Next, we have some entries from various journals and letters, starting in 1896, with Metzger writing that the deal has been made, and he regrets nothing, as they are all necessary sacrifices. It's simply good business, and the Investor has promised him much. In 1897, an employee of his named Brianna wrote a letter to her mother, but never sent it, in which she describes the new factory that Metzger is building, and how he seems to be a changed man that is promising them large dormitories and higher wages. In 1900, a Polish employee at the factory writes that there are so many floors to the factory now, and they were working with another employee when suddenly they disappeared. They asked an overseer about it, and they were told not to worry about it, but after asking again, they were beaten. They write that they're not sure why, and that the overseer has no face. Metzger writes in 1902 that the machine has come online well ahead of schedule, and the Janus doors are locked to their intended destinations, allowing for an endless supply of raw materials. He confirms that the machine can produce anything he wishes, and states that the factory bends to his will, the workers live at his mercy alone, and he is God here. In 1906, another employee writes that this place is a prison that they cannot leave, and thousands of employees continue to enter the factory while it continues to grow in size. She overheard the overseers saying that this factory is just one of many, all connected by the Janus doors. The employees' meals are apparently injected into them, giving them just enough to stay alive and useful, and she complains about the deafening noise from both the machines and the screaming. People work themselves to death and are then thrown into the production machine. They make everything from food to toys to clothes to weapons, unlike anything she could imagine. They are allowed 4 hours of sleep each night, but she often wakes to the sound of harvest men, who apparently collect certain people, likely to also throw into the machine. Metzger writes in 1912 that the investor dreams of war, which explains the current demands, but he is being kept in the dark about their goals. He worries that he has just become another cog in this machine and has no place in its future. In 1915, he writes that this wasn't what he was promised. In 1996, a few years after containment, the Foundation found a blockage of bone and scrap metal in several large pipes in the complex. The removal of the blockage resulted in a flood of water that killed 11 personnel, but electrical lights turned on throughout the factory, and a hole opened up in the central elevator shaft, leading to another floor. The fourth floor is a spherical chamber containing 200 pillar-shaped machines attached to one another, each housing a glass cylinder containing a green liquid and a preserved human brain. Each of the brains are biologically alive but have suffered damage consistent with lobotomy. They all connect to a large and intricate machine comparable to an incredibly complex analog computer, related to the control and management of the factory. Contained within this machine is a living human brain that claims to be Randolph T. Metzger, although it's unknown how it can speak and hear. An interview is conducted with Metzger's brain, in which he asks if the investor sent them and if he wants to parlay after all these years. Metzger chastises the interviewer for speaking as if they were equals, and when the interviewer says that they are just a researcher, Metzger calls him a liar and says that they are more than just researchers. The Foundation decides to reveal a bit of information in order to learn more from Metzger. They tell him that they are an organization that deals with anomalies, such as him, which surprises Metzger, as he says that his current state is just a trade secret. He was aghast at first to have his brain placed in this jar, but the investor decided to do it to increase efficiency in the factory, and that's all that matters. He says the investor was a very wealthy man, even wealthier than him, and he believes that the investor made his fortune from the shadows, with every loose coin falling his way. Metzger says that the parasites of the world called them robber barons, but if they were barons, the investor was emperor. In the end, the investor knew he was losing control and decided to end the project. The interviewer asks about the purpose of the factory, to which Metzger says it is to take industry to its logical conclusion. The other brains in this room are just additional places to store his memory, but there are many factories just like this one. The doctor ponders why Metzger has such a limited interest in conversation, and how else he might be occupying his time. Not long after, 6 Foundation personnel disappear within the factory, each one out of sight at the time of disappearance. Metzger simply stated that accidents happen, and their safety is not his concern. In 1999, the Foundation re-evaluates SCP-748, finding that it's currently uncontained, as there are potentially hundreds of such complexes across the globe, all linked via dimensional anomalies. Sometime after the discovery of Metzger, the Foundation facility set up above 748 was breached and destroyed in what's been called an Alpha Mammon event. These events involve the harvest of materials and their transmutation into products by entities that appear roughly human but have undergone extensive mechanical and surgical augmentation. It's believed that they are former employees of 748, as well as missing Foundation personnel, and possess a rusted iron cage attached to their backs for the collection of materials. Their left hands have been replaced with tools, typically sickles or circular saws. Their faces consist of simply a flaring horn, similar to those used in early phonographs, and they are capable of rendering themselves intangible. This makes them unable to interact with the physical world, but they can manifest and demanifest at any location, making containment impossible.
An Omega Mammon event involves the manifestation of various SCP-748 products at retail locations, with a side effect of causing employees and owners of said locations to ignore the abnormal nature of these products. Money used to purchase these products vanishes as soon as it's placed within a register, and credit card transactions will go through, but the money is transferred to an unknown destination. Purchased products from the first Omega Mammon event near 748 resulted in 56 casualties, and events have been reported globally in the time since. SCP-748 itself is currently in a metamorphic state, constantly changing and warping, which has resulted in 32 fatalities. Some audio was recovered from the remnants of the Foundation site above 748, which seems to consist of Metzger speaking with similar individuals across the globe, although we can only hear Metzger. He tells Liverpool that it's time to get back to work, and is happy that Tokyo has survived, although he says it's a pity they slept through the war, since it would have been quite profitable. Metzger says that the Infinity Engine has been reactivated, and the Crucible demands fresh material. The world will be that of producer and consumer, and those who refuse will be industrialized, with them fulfilling their destiny and becoming one with the free market. He finishes by declaring that the factory is back in business. That was a long one, but I think it's an important one for providing some further insight into the factory. Based on this, the entity or entities behind the factory influence the most industrious individuals on the planet to anomalously create massive amounts of food, supplies, equipment, and weapons for seemingly the purpose of war. It's also likely that based on what the Serpent's Hand believe, they do this process across multiple realities and universes, combining everything into something unimaginably massive. What war is the factory preparing for? Who is it against? And who are the soldiers in the factory's army? It's likely that if they are building towards some sort of war or some other nefarious goal, humans are just a small cog in their machine.
Lord Blackwood and the Bigfoot. Lord Blackwood, the most notable explorer, naturalist, and big game hunter in the SCP universe, has been to many exotic locales throughout his life. In tales previously featured, he hunted a great rampaging lizard in France, and explored a desolate alternate reality. This time, though, Blackwood heads for the American frontier to hunt down a mythical creature, Bigfoot. Bigfoot is a well-known SCP, SCP-1000, but knowledge of that SCP isn't really required for this tale. Instead, I'll give a bit of info on another anomaly, SCP-1845. 1845 is a collection of animals possessing near-human intelligence, capable of constructing simple tools, with a system of government modeled on medieval European feudalism. This animal group is led by a red fox, who considers itself to be of royal heritage, coming from a long line of royal foxes. This fox is the only animal in the group capable of communicating via a keyboard, and it identifies itself and its followers as extremely pious Roman Catholics. With that seemingly random explanation out of the way, let's begin. July 3rd, 1857. It has been the better part of a year since I set sail from England. I feel myself overcome with a certain melancholy every time I watch the white cliffs of Dover disappear over the horizon, seemingly watching me as I venture out into the wilderness. But whatever guilt I might feel, there is much work to be done. The vast, untamed wilds of the world wait for no man, and it is our duty as Englishmen to carry the light of civilization to the corners of creation. Today I have alighted in the Oregon Territory, in a newly founded town on the shores of Puget Sound that the pioneers call Seattle. Even now, in the height of summer, it is a cold and dreary place. Clouds meander across the heavens, bringing showers and fog, as cool winds blow across the water, and on all sides the tiny town is surrounded by the massive evergreens that populate this country. In many ways, it is not unlike the climate of my boyhood home in the West Country, and I felt an odd sense of nostalgia as the summer rains wet my cheek. But it is not the town, nor the weather that interest me. It is the forests that hold my true reason for venturing to this virgin frontier. In the town, I have hired porters and 2 guides, a white man and a civilized Indian. I spent many hours in conversation with the noble redskin, which confirmed the legends I had heard repeated third hand in the Gentleman's Club back on Broad Street. In the unexplored woods east of the Sound, so the Indians said, there lived a race of primates unknown to science, half again as tall as a man, covered head to toe in thick fur, quick and nimble, and possessing of an almost man-like cleverness. Sasquatch, my guide called the creatures, but they had been called by many names by the tribes he knew of. Semiqui, Momo, Quickie, Skookum, and Bigfoot among them. Even among the Indians, they were mostly regarded as little more than legend, but my guide informed me that he had seen one in the flesh 2 years prior, in the foothills of the mountain his people called Tahoma, and that he had heard tales of a tribe that worshipped them as gods. Tomorrow we set out for Tahoma, for it is Bigfoot that I seek now as my quarry. I mean to find one of the elusive beasts and bring it back to England, dead if I must, alive if I can. I have brought ample equipment from England and purchased fresh victuals from the shops of this town. Tonight I plan, and I pray that my hunt will not fail. July 7th, 1857. The forests of the territory make for slow going. In my adventures I have hacked through jungle reeds, forced my way through the tall grasses of the Serengeti, braved the unforgiving cold of the Himalayas, and baked under the cruel Egyptian sun. But what hand or blade can cast aside the trunks of the ancient evergreens that stand by the myriads in every direction? The guides assure me we are making steady progress, though it seems we have gone scarcely 24 miles since we left Seattle. I caught my first glimpse of Tahoma today as we entered a clearing upon a hill, and I was overwhelmed by the beauty of that tableau that I observed. Tahoma is not nearly the height of the famous Peak 15 that Sir Waugh described last year in Nepal, but unlike the great Himalayas, it stands alone, a solitary peak towering above the forests of the territory, like a proud and mighty king surveying a kingdom encompassing all that it perceives. Shortly after midday, we chanced upon a fox cub, scarcely old enough to hunt for itself, imprisoned in a cage of wood and hides. My Indian guide pointed out a clever set of machinations connected to the box, and informed me it was a trap laid by the Indians who lived in those woods, and that the unfortunate rascal had been lured in by a scrap of meat to be captured. He said to me that his people were most efficient. The beast's hide would make clothing, its teeth jewelry, its meat food for the children, its sinew cords and rope. Let there be no doubt, any who may chance to read this, that I with glee engaged in many a fox hunt in the county pastures in my younger days. But to ride out with one's hounds is a gentleman's game. In this, my friend, there was no sport. I looked into the creature's eyes, and it seemed to regard me almost as a starving beggar child might regard a man of wealth, envious and jealous, but at the same time supplicant, as if to beg me for mercy. I drew my knife and cut the cords holding the cage door shut, and the vulpine burst free and darted into the woods, fetching a brief glance at me as it ran away. July 8th, 1857. This morning we encountered a half-dozen Indians in a hunting party near the banks of a river. I had thought at first to call it the Blackwood River when we forded it, though my guide informed me it was known to his people as Nisqually. The Indians regarded us at first with suspicion. I know not if they had seen a white man before, and I feared the worst. But my Indian called out to them in a language strange to me, and they responded gleefully in the same. I learned that he was of the same tribe as they, and that he called their leader his cousin, and they received us warmly. We luncheoned on salmon the Indians had caught in the river, and traded with them for food and supplies. I was most excited to hear from one of the younger Redskins that he had seen a Bigfoot once when he was young, for the porters believed this expedition to be a fool's errand, and with this revelation they seemed most renewed in their vigors. By the time we parted ways, I had managed to learn a few words of their language. After I have brought a Bigfoot back to England, I shall have to return to this land and learn more of the ways of these people. July 13th, 1857. I must write in haste, for my captors have not discovered this book. I am in darkness, alone, my feet bound, in a tent in a place I do not know, well guarded without by my captors. They came upon us 2 nights ago. We had encamped for the night in a clearing not a dozen miles from the place my Indian told me he had seen the Bigfoot 2 years hence. They must have been lurking in the darkness for hours, and came upon the chief porter unawares while he stood the night watch. Before I could reach my rifle, all but one of the porters and my Indian guide had been felled by the brute's arrows and hatchets. I took 2 of the bastards in reply with my rifle, and 4 more with my pistol, before one of them grabbed me from behind and knocked me out. When I awoke, I had been tied to a pole, and 2 of the savages were carrying me deeper into the woods. I could see my Indian and the last surviving porter being carried similarly. I called out to my Indian, and he told me that he recognized our captors as a tribe that had been ancient enemies of his own. They were unrepentant pagans and cannibals, he told me, and worshipped a strange god that lived in the mountain. It was said they raided the villages of the other tribes for sacrifices to offer to their god. Surely, he said, we had been chosen to fulfill this onerous duty. It is very cold here, though the sun shines brightly through the trees at midday. I know not whether the savages have my weapons or not. I pray that they do, for if I cannot reach them, I will surely perish in this wilderness. July 16th, 1857. Words cannot express the terror I have beheld this day. The savages have brought us to their home camp in the foothills. Even now, in the midst of summer, clumps of snow congregate under the rocks and at the bases of the trees. At midday, the 3 of us were escorted to a snowy clearing by the edge of a vast wood climbing up the mountain. Hundreds of savages formed a half circle around the clearing, and our porter was loosed from his bonds and dragged to the center. One of the savages began beating upon a massive drum and singing in a bizarre language the likes of which I have never heard. Others joined in, and the forests were filled with the din of 1,000 screaming savages. Suddenly, the trees at the edge of the clearing seemed to rustle and part way, and the throng silenced as it emerged. Bigfoot, in the flesh. The tales had not done the beast justice. It stood 15 feet if it stood an inch, and it could not have weighed less than half a long ton. I could scarcely discern its countenance beneath the matted fur that covered its face. Ravenous, primal, caked in blood and spittle. It bore the scars of many struggles, and, praying that the reader will forgive my lack of modesty, displayed its manhood proudly. It set its eyes on the porter and charged at him with a speed I would not have expected from a brute of its size. The porter made to run, but the savages closed in upon him and allowed him no egress. Within seconds, the beast was upon him. I could hardly bear to look as it ripped him limb from limb, its yellowed, sharpened teeth tearing into his flesh, his blood running down its jaws as it greedily feasted upon him. The savages returned me to the tent afterward. I fear I am next. July 19th, 1857. I hope by now, should anyone be reading this years hence, that you regard me as an honest man. Throughout my many years exploring the unknown corners of the world, I have considered it my obligation to tell no less than the whole truth regarding my discoveries, that my fellow countrymen might know of the world that lies beyond the borders of our great empire, and prepare for the day when the light of goodliness and peace shines around the world. I say this now, for the events I must now recount might seem a fantasy to you, dear reader. Indeed, I would find it difficult to believe myself, had I not seen it with my own eyes. But on my sacred honor as an Englishman, I assure you that every word of it is true. On the afternoon of the 17th, the savages offered my Indian guide as a sacrifice to Bigfoot as they had my porter. Yesterday, the 18th, they prepared to do the same to me. I spent the morning in solemn prayer and reflection, and for the first time in my life, I understood the sorrow of a condemned man awaiting the hangman's noose. I felt I had lived a good life, and I was prepared to do what any good Englishman would, and meet my maker with a stiff upper lip and a clean conscience. The Indians led me to the clearing and loosed my bonds. I strode calmly into the center of the clearing and closed my eyes. If I was to die, I intended to die with my dignity intact. The drumming and the screaming started, and I heard the trees rustle as Bigfoot drew near to claim his meal. But it was not Bigfoot's approach that silenced the savages. Rather, I heard, distant yet remarkably near, the howl of a fox. Muffled chatter arose from the throng as a second howl answered the first. Soon, a third animal was howling, and before long the woods were alive with a cacophony. Not only foxes, but I heard the howls of wolves, the screeching of hawks and falcons, the roar of the mountain cats, even the calls of pigeons. I opened my eyes as 100 animals or more emerged from the woods and set upon the Indians. I beheld foxes and wolves, elk and deer, gulls and eagles, bears and raccoons, side by side like a cavalry charge as they knocked the wild men to the ground and tore out their throats. Every one of the creatures ran right past me, barely darting their eyes my way as I beheld the sight. Some even seemed to have markings on their brows, like the war paint the Indians themselves were decorated with. I chose to take advantage of the opportunity and ran. Neither man nor beast made any attempt to stop me as I made for the west, away from Tahoma and Bigfoot, towards the sea and hopefully some sign of civilization. By nightfall, I had easily put 10 miles between myself and the camp, but alone, hungry, bruised, and exhausted, and in the dark, I could go no further, and curled up by a tree to sleep. When I awoke this morning, I found myself surrounded by wild beasts. Half a dozen deer stood in a semicircle before me, paint on their faces, their horns and coats covered with savage blood, and 2 raccoons in their center. I panicked when first I saw them, and instinctively tried to reach for my gun, for fear that they had come to finish me off. They stepped back in unison when they saw me startle, and I saw that one of the deer, upon its back, was carrying a large bundle. My own possessions, scavenged from the remains of my camp. The creature knelt to the ground and shrugged, letting it fall to the ground, and I eagerly examined it. Much of what I had brought into the woods was gone, but my rifle was intact, and my pistol, and a tent, and alcohol with which to clean my cuts and scrapes, and enough dried rations to last 2 weeks' time. I barely had time to ponder this miracle before the rest of the animals fell to their knees as well, and opened a path between them. A fox approached me, old, weathered, bearing signs of having seen more winters than most of its kind do. It bore an air of dignity about it that one rarely sees from such creatures as it approached me and stood before me. It seemed to examine me carefully, contemplating as it looked me over, before it uttered a low bark, and one of the raccoons approached me. I noticed now something I had overlooked before. The raccoon had, tied to its back with a thin piece of twine, a rolled piece of paper. The fox gestured at the paper with its nose, and I reached down and drew the paper free. I unrolled it and found a handwritten message in English, which I present to you below. We, Alaric V, by the grace of God, King of all the forest, Lord of the plains, Duke of the grand fir and the undergrowth, Count of the swamp, Margrave of the nameless mountain, Warden of all the streams and rivers, and Lord Protector of the tribes of man, Defender of the faith, recognizing you as a fellow Christian and a civilized man, grateful for your rescue of our royal issue from the devious machinations of the pagan savages, thankful that your kind have returned to this land, hopeful that you will on our behalf deliver news to your homeland that Christendom shall have in these parts a steadfast ally, acknowledging that in rescuing you from the false god of the pagans, we are responsible for your welfare and safe passage in our lands. Do hereby on this day, the 19th day of the 7th month, in the year of our Lord, 1857, bestow upon you the rank of Knight Commander of the Order of the Thistle, with all the privileges and responsibilities of that office. Command you to, from this day forward, act as a loyal servant of Christ and his Church, Catholic and Apostolic, for as long as you shall live, and charge you to return to the lands of Christendom bearing news of our kingdom, and to return with an embassy for the negotiation of amicable communion between our nations. To this document we affix our seal, sacred and royal. The paper had been signed, so to say, with an ink stamp of what I assumed to have been the fox's paw print. I looked down at the creature, who I now saw regarded me with a gaze almost human in its wisdom. It raised its right paw to touch its forehead, and lowered it to its chest and shoulders, making the sign of the cross. I repeated the gesture, and it nodded to me. Having apparently reached an agreement, the fox that called itself Alaric V turned and strode away into the woods, its motley retinue following behind. September 7th, 1857. It has been over a month since I made my escape from the forest and entered my convalescence here in Seattle. I wandered 5 days in the woods, and might be wandering still, if not for that by chance I found the same friendly tribe of Indians I had met on the banks of the Nisqually 2 weeks before. With what bits of their language I knew, I tried to tell them of our encounters with the savages, the Bigfoot, and the strange group of animals that had been my salvation. I know not if they understood me, or if they merely thought me mad, but a small group of them traveled north with me and led me back to town, where I have rested and healed my wounds since. It is too late in the year to attempt another expedition in search of the Bigfoot. I am told that the winter in these parts is long and cold, and that it will be April before another expedition to the foothills is advisable. In any event, I have little money left with which to hire anyone. I have sent a letter south to San Francisco to be telegraphed to the Royal Society in London, containing an account of my findings and a request for financing to launch a proper expedition into this wilderness, whether to capture a Bigfoot or to establish an embassy with the strange nation of the Fox King Alaric. Barring disaster, I expect a reply by Christmas. I do not hold much hope that they will assent to such a proposition. After all, I am the only witness to these fantastical events, and the only evidence, the declaration of knighthood granted me by the Fox, will not be in London for several years or more. Perhaps I shall leave this territory entirely when the next ship arrives in May, and set out for other parts unknown. I heard before I left London that the White Rajah in Borneo had acquired a strange machine that fell from the sky. Who knows what other wonders might lurk in the Javanese jungles, waiting to be shown the light of day by one such as myself. SCP-3003. The End of History. A utopia is a society in which there are no problems, and is more or less a perfect place to live for all residents. This is, of course, a fictional concept, one often seen in science fiction stories, such as Star Trek. A utopia is unachievable, not only because perfection is, in general, unattainable, but also due to the inherent individuality of humans. If you could make everyone think and act the same way, you'd be on your way to creating some form of a perfect society, but you'd also lose what it means to be human. This is the concept we'll be looking at with SCP-3003, an alien world that blends some squicky body horror with a commentary on humanity. SCP-3003 is an Earth-sized planet 208 light-years from Earth, orbiting a star similar to our Sun. There are 4 notable anomalies on this planet. The first is a beetle-like organism referred to as Mars that acts as a parasite in humans when infected with 3003-2. 3003-2 is a microorganism capable of infecting both the Mars as well as humans, and modifies the behavior of both. Humans that have become infected with this microorganism comprise the entire native population of the planet, roughly 30 billion people. Finally, the people of SCP-3003 have managed to create a device capable of creating wormholes, allowing them to travel across great distances, including to Earth. The planet itself seems quite similar to ours, with similar temperatures and biosphere, although the only organisms that are present on both planets are humans. Occupying 30% of 3003's landmass are the Mars, creatures that share a number of similarities with beetles, but hold a few key differences. They are capable of secreting a fiber similar to spider silk, referred to as silkate, and they can coat their bodies in a caustic fluid as a defense mechanism. In the wild, their lifespan is about 15 years, and they spend most of the time airborne, including performing reproduction. Most other species of life have been removed from SCP-3003, and the reason for that is because of SCP-3003-2, the microorganism. This organism infects the Mars through physical contact, and can also affect humans by entering their bloodstream. This infection is not normally found in wild Mars, but is instead purposefully administered to captive Mars by the human population of 3003. The reason for that is where things get a little disturbing. The microorganism changes the physiology and behavior of the Mars, causing them to develop a stinger on their heads. Come nightfall, they will then seek out the closest human and use the stinger to inject a paralyzing agent. The stinger will also inject the microorganism at this time, infecting the human. Even worse, the Mars will then begin secreting a caustic fluid from their stinger, creating a large hole in the human's body. The Mars will enter the body and seal the hole shut with silkate. Since the microorganism cannot naturally reproduce inside a human body, the Mars acts as a sort of factory, living in the human's body and continually resupplying the microorganism so that the host is constantly infected. Lifespan for the Mars in this state is roughly 3 years. The presence of the microorganism inside a human drastically changes their behavior, making them practically entirely devoted to the well-being and spread of the Mars. Infected humans, who I'll refer to as bug people for simplicity, will begin.
Okay, it's getting late. I think I've been streaming for just about 2 hours, maybe hour and a half or something, but yeah, I'm gonna end it here. I just want to say, I think I want to work on the 16-bit levels more. I mean, these 8-bit ones are okay, but I mean, they're kind of bland and they're really blocky, but it's not a big deal. I just kind of feel like it's funner to work on the 16-bit ones because there's more detail and you can do like those tracing cutouts, but I don't know, maybe it's just this stage. Flashman's stage is pretty bland. But yeah, that's gonna do it for me. I'm gonna probably continue this tomorrow, and let's see if I'll get around to doing the music over the weekend. I just need a break from it because I spent like all of last weekend organizing the MIDI files and all the files and importing things, and it's just a big headache, honestly. It was terrible. I mean, Caustic is just terrible for that kind of stuff. But yeah, anyway, so I'm gonna try and continue this tomorrow. If not, then it's not a big deal, but I'll try. I'll let you know if anything changes. Otherwise, yeah, on the SCP story we're listening to, like, I know I cut it early, but it was SCP-3003, The End of History. So if you want to listen to it or continue it, then there you go. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, that's gonna do it for me. I'm gonna go to bed now, so I'll see you next time.